3 days before my father announced his retirement, I found out my office keys no longer worked. Not all of them, just the side entrance at the Grove City location. The old building with the cracked concrete out front and the coffee machine that always smelled faintly like burnt hazelnut no matter how often Linda cleaned it. At first, I thought the lock was sticking again. I stood there in the rain, trying the key twice before one of the younger mechanics opened the door from inside. He looked uncomfortable immediately. Not guilty. Worse. Prepared. "Oh," he said. "I thought Trevor told you." That was the first time I realized whatever was happening had already become normal to everyone else. I walked inside, dripping water onto the mat, while two guys near the alignment bay suddenly got very busy looking at a transmission. Nobody said hi. Not in a mean way, just careful. That's the thing people don't tell you about family businesses. By the time you realize you're being edged out, half the employees already know. They can smell shifts in power before you can. My father owned Russo Tire and Auto for 32 years. Started by my grandfather with one garage and two lifts behind a bowling alley outside Dayton. By the time I was old enough to drive, we had 6 locations. By the time I hit 35, we had 11. Most of my 20s disappeared inside those buildings. Christmas Eve brake jobs, frozen pipes, insurance fights. 2 in the morning calls because somebody drove through a service store drunk. I missed a girlfriend's funeral once because a hydraulic line burst at the Newark shop and flooded half the floor. My father hugged me afterward and said, "That's sacrifice. That's how real businesses survive." At the time, I remember feeling proud. Now I'm not sure. Trevor came into the picture 4 years ago after my father married Elise. He was 27, marketing degree, good haircut. The kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers with no-show socks and somehow never sweat, even in July. He wasn't rude, exactly. That almost would have been easier. Trevor had this polished attentiveness that made older people feel interesting. He asked questions nobody else asked. My father loved that. Loved having somebody look at him like he was still the hardest working man in the room, instead of a 63-year-old with cholesterol medication in the center console. The first few months, I honestly tried. People always think resentment starts immediately. It usually doesn't. Usually it starts with little moments your brain keeps trying to excuse. One afternoon, Trevor came with me to inspect a shop renovation in Lancaster. We were walking the property while I explained drainage issues near the back lot. He nodded through most of it, scrolling his phone. Then he interrupted me halfway through a sentence and asked, "So why are the waiting rooms all kind of depressing?" I thought he was joking. He wasn't. A week later, he hired some consulting company out of Cincinnati to modernize customer experience. Suddenly, there were fake plants in the lobbies and scripted greetings taped near the registers. One of our mechanics, Luis, stared at the new script for a while and finally said, "I fix transmissions. I'm not welcoming people onto a cruise ship." Trevor laughed like they were bonding. Luis didn't. My father sided with Trevor anyway. That became the pattern. Not dramatic fights, small directional turns. Like water slowly changing course. Trevor started sitting in on meetings that I somehow stopped hearing about until afterward. Then he started answering questions directed at me. Then my father started letting him. The weird part is, Dad still acted normal around me most of the time. That probably messed me up more than if he'd just been openly cold. He'd still text me photos of fish he caught, still ask if I'd checked the Browns score, still call me when his Wi-Fi stopped working. Then I'd show up Monday morning and find out Trevor had been included in conversations about expansion plans I knew nothing about. like I existed in two separate versions of his life that never touched. About 8 months ago, Dad started talking about retirement more seriously. Not fully stepping away, men like him never really stop. But he started saying things like, "I'm tired of payroll headaches," or "I don't need another winter killing myself for this place." One Sunday, Elise hosted dinner at their house. There were maybe 12 people there. Her side of the family mostly, Trevor grilling outside, my father pretending he understood how to use one of those pellet smokers. At one point, I walked into the kitchen looking for a bottle opener and heard Elise say quietly to someone, "Trevor's really given Richard new energy." Richard. Nobody who knew my father 30 years called him Richard. Then she said something else, softer. "I think Dominic reminds him of the harder years." She noticed me standing there after that. Didn't look embarrassed, just smiled a little and asked if I wanted sweet tea. I said no, even though I did. That sentence sat in my chest for weeks. The harder years. Like I was somehow attached to all the parts of his life he wanted distance from now. A few months later, we had the company Christmas party downtown. Open bar, buffet chicken, mechanics wearing button-down shirts that still fit like work uniforms, wives taking pictures near the fake fireplace in the banquet hall. Around 9, my father tapped his glass with a fork. Everybody turned automatically. He still had that kind of gravity. He gave the usual speech first. Growth, loyalty, community. Same stuff. Then he started talking about Trevor. Fresh perspective, leadership, future vision. I remember one specific thing for no reason at all. Somebody near me dropped a fork during the speech, and nobody picked it up for several minutes. Dad smiled toward Trevor. Then he said, "I didn't realize how much I needed someone I could finally pass things to." You could feel people doing math in their heads. I looked down at my drink because suddenly, making eye contact with anybody felt humiliating. Dad kept talking after that, but I honestly couldn't tell you what he said. Trevor came outside after me later, while I was standing near the hotel dumpsters, pretending to answer emails. He had a suit jacket over one shoulder. "You disappeared," he said. "Needed air." He nodded like he understood exactly the correct amount. Then he said, "You know he worries about you, right?" I laughed a little at that. Not because it was funny. Trevor looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd met him. "He thinks the business became your whole life," he said. "I think he wants more for you." That one actually landed. Because for maybe half a second, I wondered if that was true. Then I remembered the 70-hour weeks, the missed funeral, the years he kept saying, "One day all this will be yours." People rewrite history when they get tired. That's the dangerous part. About 2 weeks after the party, I found out my grandfather's original operating agreement still existed. Not a copy, the original. Linda discovered it while cleaning out storage boxes at the downtown office after a pipe burst. She called me because my name was on the folder. Inside were ownership documents nobody had looked at in years. My grandfather had built-in protections against exactly this kind of thing. He'd left my father majority ownership after he died, but control transferred differently if leadership succession became contested. I read the paperwork 3 times, sitting alone in my kitchen. Then, once more the next morning, because I genuinely thought I misunderstood it. I hadn't. That was around the same time little things got stranger. My company credit card suddenly stopped working for hotel bookings. Trevor asked IT to migrate executive communications onto a separate email chain. One regional manager started calling Trevor before calling me. Nobody announced anything. That's what made it crazy-making. No confrontation, no conversation, just a gradual administrative disappearance, like dying in paperwork. Then came the side door lock. After the mechanic let me in that morning, I walked straight to my father's office. Trevor was sitting in the chair beside the desk, eating almonds from a little plastic container. Dad looked tired before I even spoke. I asked why my access had changed. Trevor answered first. We updated security permissions. Security permissions. Like I was some former employee hanging around after termination. Dad rubbed both hands over his face slowly. We should have called you first. I remember staring at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence. It never came. Trevor stood up then, maybe trying to ease tension. You know how transitions get messy. Transitions. There it was again. That corporate language people use when they don't want to say replacement. I looked at my father, not Trevor. Dad wouldn't hold eye contact. Instead, he picked up a pen off his desk and clicked it open, closed it, opened it again. Tiny, nervous movements. I suddenly remembered him teaching me how to change brake pads when I was 13. Same hands, same wedding ring. Something in me went cold right there. Not explosive, not dramatic, just cold. I asked one question. Was I ever actually part of the succession plan? Dad looked up too fast. Dominic! That told me enough. Nobody spoke for maybe 5 seconds. You could hear an air compressor cycling somewhere in the shop. Then Trevor did something strange. He said quietly, I told him he needed to have this conversation months ago. And weirdly, I believed him. That's the part that still bothers me, because I'd spent years turning Trevor into the villain in my head. But sitting there, looking at him chewing those stupid almonds, he honestly looked less comfortable than my father did. Elise called me later that night. She sounded exhausted. Not manipulative, just tired. Your father's scared, she said. Of what? A long pause. Getting old, regretting things, becoming unnecessary. I sat on my couch, holding the phone against my ear, while traffic moved outside my apartment. Then she said something I still think about sometimes. He loves you, Dominic. He just likes being needed by Trevor right now. I didn't answer, because that might have been the cruelest part of all.